Welcome to New Realities. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and I'm really happy to have Jonathan Raickert here. He's a fellow of this Sedona community that I've been part of, and he's an awakening coach. So that's not just the mind or the spirits of the body. So we're going to be talking about all levels of awakening. So I do like to hear people's story. Like, what were you kind of normal? Were you always abnormal? What was the awakening to awakening?
Well, probably the most significant event for me was about 5 years ago, and I was on a silent meditation retreat and extended long meditation all day long, and I had gone there with the specific intention to have an awakening, and it wasn't happening. And I remember,
why'd you even want an awakening? You must have had some inkling of
yeah, because I was kind of an alpha. I have a target, I want to go achieve it. I was in that kind of mindset, and so I became extremely frustrated in this retreat setting. I'm like in the meditation retreat going, like, I'm leaving if it doesn't happen,
Right.
And so one evening I was just kind of at the peak of my frustration, and I thought, I'm leaving tomorrow, and if I don't wake up at 5 a.m., because that was when the first sitting was going to happen, if I don't wake up because I sleep in, then I'm just going to go home. I'm just going home. So I kind of like threw it up in the air to see what would happen. And I woke up, I went and sat. I started deviating from the practice that was requested that I do.
Breathing? Was it a Vipassana thing?
No, it wasn't Vipassana. It was, we were doing different body awareness exercises.
All right.
And so I just started deviating and feeling into my different energy centers. And then I started to play with pulling energy into my heart in different ways. And I had I don't know how to describe it. I'm still at loss for words, but it was an explosion of bliss in the center of my chest that just filled my entire experience of reality. And it was more that the amplitude of that experience was much, much stronger than the feeling sense that I had in my body or my emotional body or even my thought processes. They were so present. So I didn't disappear. It wasn't an out-of-body experience or near-death experience. I was still present to some degree in time space, but my awareness was, I would say, 90% engulfed in this experience of divine bliss.
And you really felt like this shower of bliss coming down.
Yeah, it was inside of me coming outward. And it was, and now when I think back on it, it was like it was an unintentional channeled experience. So this persisted very strongly for an hour and a half. And then I was able to gather myself, and I thought, I ended up leaving the next day because I got what I wanted, and I wanted to experience this again.
Right.
So I sat in the next morning, and within maybe 20 seconds felt the same feeling again.
Right. Wow.
And so I sat with that for about an hour and a half, and then I woke up every morning and it was there. It was persistent, and it persisted for 6 months. And so when I would move around the day, I started to practice dimming, like a dimmer switch, turning it down so I could function.
For 6 months it went on?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, it was very powerful.
So you could amplify or
yes. And so when I wanted to sit and fully go into that experience, I could turn it up to a 9. So it wasn't the rapturous experience I had the first time, but it was 9 out of 10. And when I was moving around my day, I still wanted to carry it with me, but I needed to be able to outwardly focus more so I could get things done. So I would turn it down to a 1 or a 2. And so then I started playing with increasing or decreasing the intensity of the experience. And so that was really the most profound experience up into kind of recently. But
how long ago was that?
This was maybe 5 years ago. And so that course corrected me because I was very much into biohacking and health coaching, doing kind of like blood labs and analysis for people. And
so you were into health before that?
Yes.
That was like, you were like fine tuning the body.
Yeah. So I was doing a number of things. So I was teaching yoga full time and running teacher training with that.
In the Bay Area.
In the Bay Area. And I was teaching meditation, but it was the more classical lineages, you know, Vipassana, you mentioned, some breath training, some mantra training stuff, some like kind of the conventional stuff. And when this occurred, I really wanted to understand it rationally. That was kind of like step one. Can I explain what just happened from the standpoint of known science?
Really?
And this would be science that stood outside the conventional paradigm, but nonetheless have been studied, double-blind, published, peer-reviewed stuff that is just kind of like, oh, that stuff over there. You know what I'm saying? It's like not scientism, it's actual true science.
But you were actually trying to gauge what had happened to you physiologically. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. And so, yes, because my orientation was very physical. And so I wanted to understand what was going on in the brain, what was going on in the heart, what was going on with the neurotransmitters, with the hormones.
But wasn't there a transcendent presence that also transcended the body?
Yes, but I wanted to understand the linkage.
Right.
I wanted to understand I wanted to understand the linkage, because it seemed to me that it originated by doing some body manipulations. So I was able to use my body to have a transcendent experience. So that was step one, to understand that. And that got the ball rolling for my previous podcast, the Quantum Yoga podcast. And I interviewed 60 different frontier scientists, contemplative neuroscientists, people like Beverly Rubik that you know.
Yes, Beverly Rubik, brilliant. Yes.
And Dean Radin from IONS, and a number of these people. And so I was kind of building a scientific framework to understand. And then I started to learn and to practice things like neurofeedback, biofeedback. So I got the whole EEG set up and started studying that. And there's a massive community in neurofeedback that is studying basically awakening.
Really, what happens to awaken people physiologically?
Yes, it's specifically in the brain.
In the brain?
Yes, specifically in the brain.
So when someone claims to have an awakening or this clarity of mind, there's certain neurological sequences. Did you notice a pattern there?
Yes. Yes, there are a few patterns.
Okay.
And so here's the thing that I don't know that many people understand, is that if you have a state change, there's always a physiological change. You can't have one without the other.
So if you have a change in consciousness,
yes,
there's a neurology that goes along with it.
Yes.
Yeah, of course, because it's feeling. So the neurology may create the state change, or
I think it's bidirectional.
But what you need, that what creates the neurology? An intention, or something from outside of you then must create.
Well, when you're doing it intentionally, if you want to use the body to create a mystical type experience, or use your mind to do it, it's the combination of the right quality of attention and the right type of intention.
Right. I think just by smiling, we change our physiology, and we can force ourselves to smile. Even if you don't feel like it, it will then change something in the body. So it's like that.
Yes, it's like that 10x.
Okay.
It's like that, but scale it up to the point of having like a full-on transcendent experience.
So what are the features in the neurology of a transcendent experience?
So the most commonly studied feature is that people who can do this in an intentional way, we'll say it's intentional, right? That's practiced, is that they have the ability to bring their brain into what's called alpha coherence. Okay, and so what that means is, I would imagine many of your viewers know what the alpha range is 8 to 12 hertz, okay? But coherent alpha is basically like all of the cerebral cortex exhibiting this in synchrony, which is a unique feature. Okay.
Right.
And it's not something that it's interesting because when most of neurofeedback focuses on pathological conditions.
Right.
People come in with symptomology, psychological.
Right.
The person who the practitioner goes, okay, this is what's wrong with you. This is what's normal over here because we have a database of normal people.
Mhm.
We're comparing you to so-called normal, and we're going to correct you towards normal.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right. Right.
So when they see something like what I just described, highly coherent alpha in the brain, they usually associate that with some negative symptom or pathology. And so
because
they just
they're only looking for pathology.
Exactly.
Because they're pathological.
Yeah. Well, you kind of get what you always look for, right?
Exactly.
So what's a very small minority, which is maybe 5% of neurofeedback people are going, well, what if the database was awakened people?
Yeah, no, I think.
And what if we were comparing what was normal to awakened states and what we
Right.
know about awakened states, and then we could move in those directions.
Right. And then so you model awakened states, and then can you actually artificially stimulate awakened states
Well, so yes, that's
based
possible.
on the
Yes,
manipulating the brainwave frequencies?
Yes, so it's possible to use things like stim, like electrical stimulation, or magnetic pulsing.
And is this the Persinger helmet? Do you know Persinger?
Yes, so that is the God helmet.
Yeah, the God helmet.
Right.
Yes,
so that's
magnetic.
that's an
Right,
example of pulse
right,
magnetics.
Right.
But you can use electrical stim to do it. And I was not doing invasive stuff like that. I was using neurofeedback. So what neurofeedback does, for people who don't know, is it's one of the few styles that I studied, and there's a bunch of different neurofeedback styles, okay, is called neuromeditation. And so in neuromeditation, what Jeff Tarrant did, who created this system, he looked at he based this off Travis and Shear. Travis and Shear were published a lot. They came out of the TM tradition, the Maharishi University, where they were studying a lot of these sort of transcendent states. And they did a meta-analysis of all the different meditation styles that were studied. And they essentially said, well, we can see 4 brain states out of hundreds and hundreds of studies, out of many, many different kinds of meditation. They're basically creating only 4 brain states. Okay. So now Jeff said, well, if there's only 4 brain states, we can create a neurofeedback protocol for each one of those states. So basically the software says, if your brain goes that direction, we'll say that direction is TM, that style, then we'll give you some type of feedback, like auditory, like we'll play some meditation music.
So if your brain is pulsating at like a TM sort of vibration, then we're going to give you a signal.
Yes.
That you're at that. That. Oh, I see. That's how it works. Okay.
And so then if you lose focus or your mind goes elsewhere, you get monkey mind, you go elsewhere, then the feedback gets removed.
Okay.
So it's not invasive. It's feedback. So it's looking at what the electrical frequencies are in the different areas of your brain.
I think I may have done this. It's been around for a while.
It's been around for a while. And like the early cats that were doing this stuff, this kind of came out of the whole like LSD psilocybin revolution. And they were also meditating, and then they were engineers, and they wanted to see if they could use technology. And so one of my teachers, who's like one of this old guard, Dr. Les Femi, who created a style called Open Focus, makes a neurosynchrony trainer that trains for 10 hertz or whatever you want to program, but usually it's 10 hertz synchrony across the brain.
Is that the frequency of awakening, right? Maybe.
Well, so what's interesting is you go deeper into this, you see that the alpha is like a portal. If you can get to this alpha, there's many different directions that you go through the portal of alpha, and now there's many directions that you can go. For example,
I just want to understand, alpha, is that like the creative state where you're getting ideas?
No, it's more of a quiet state.
Oh, it's more like, is it a dream?
No, so usually when people discuss like awakened states, or there's references to vision. They're
Okay.
seeing things, there's active imagination, it's dreamlike, it's that type of thing where it's visual. That primarily happens when you have a lot of theta going on, especially in the back of the brain where the visual centers are.
Okay.
So when you have that, which is like, you know, right when you wake up in the morning,
okay,
where you maybe wake up and you're still remembering your dream.
Yes, I
or
love
you're
that state. That's
Th-
theta.
that's theta.
Okay.
That's theta. When you're in this alpha range, specifically in 8 to 10 hertz, there's almost zero thought occurring.
Oh, really? So you're present, maybe. Is that it?
Yes, it's the fully present and aware, but not thinking.
Right. So I have that when I'm sitting in nature sometimes.
Yes.
Just right there, presence. Yes.
And so as the frequency starts to increase, say between 10 and 12 hertz, thoughts will occur, but they'll occur in the background or the surround. They're not happening directly inside your mind. They're like, you can hear it if you tune into it, or you could kind of ignore it, like maybe the sound of someone shuffling something in the background.
Right.
And so that's that higher alpha 10 to 12 hertz. And so this is sort of the sweet spot. And when you get predominantly there, then with your intention, you can go different directions.
Well, what directions do you go?
So if you want to have a high-powered mystical type experience that is like a high arousal type of experience, and I can explain arousal and valence in a second here, but like a high arousal, this is like the kind of kundalini type of experience that you may have heard of before. Right.
I have a great person. You should test her because she is having these massive kundalini awakenings.
Okay. And so when that occurs, we start to see a lot of gamma frequencies begin to present. And so gamma also, like if you weren't, people have gamma experiences all the time. It's like the word puzzle is kind of like the classic example of that. The word puzzle being, okay, what do the words apple, pine have in common?
Apple, like pineapple, you mean? What are those? Pineapple?
Yes.
You mean the word pineapple?
Yes. Like what do the words pine and crab have in common?
Pine, they're both have these like sticky, spiky things. Or what are the words you're talking about?
Yes.
Not the concept.
Right, not the concept, the words. And so this is one way to have what's called a gamma burst. So if you
some creative like insight into that.
Exactly. So the connection obviously between the words pine and crab are apple. Okay. Right. So like a pineapple or crab apple. But when you realize that, then you have this like aha moment. Right. That's called a gamma burst.
I see.
Okay. So having an awakening type kundalini experience means that kind of gamma burst is continuously happening at a much higher level.
Oh, I get that.
So it's like a massive download. I
love that moment of epiphany where you have this connection. Happens in my writing a lot where you're connecting these points that don't seem to be connected, and then there's this aha, and it's a great feeling.
It's a great feeling, and a lot of us pursue that feeling. We look for activities and behaviors and connect with people that trigger more gamma. We're like gamma addicts. You know, it's like kind of a weird way of looking at it, but I love that. We have a lot of gamma addicts here in Sedona.
In my book, I talk to Darryl Anka, who talks about that gamma wave when he's channeling. It's the gamma that they're looking for.
Yeah, so that's like one direction a person
that's one direction.
And it usually is more of a kind of claircognizant type of experience, not a clairvoyant or a clairaudient experience, but it can be.
A cognizant meaning it's a clarity of thought.
Yes.
Of like a connection.
Yes.
An epiphany of thought.
Yes, exactly. Epiphany or revelation, something like that.
Right. I love that.
But what's also interesting about gamma, this is for me the most interesting thing, and this is what connected back to my mystical type experience, is that when you feel enough high amplitude positive emotion in your heart, the heart can actually cause the brain to create gamma.
I like that. I didn't know that. I did not know that.
Yes. And so you can cultivate the strength and the skill of improving, and not just improving, but having control over the amplitude of a positive emotion so that you can trigger these types of
Is this
things.
heart math stuff? You know the heart math?
It's like heart math, but now you're going to an entirely another level, because what starts to happen is, okay, so heart math is the training that comes along with heart math is based on Tibetan loving kindness meditation or metta meditation. And so in neuromeditation, what they found was that these monks that are exhibiting, that have been practicing metta for a very long period of time, have a lot of gamma, and they have it in specific regions of their brain.
Oh.
And Richie Davidson is the famous neuroscientist who brought this all out, wrote a couple books about it. And the monks that he was studying had 25 times the amount of the normal person's gamma before they started doing meditation.
Oh, really?
And when they started to meditate, it was off the charts.
How did they get
even measure
25? How did that come about before they started meditating?
That is a state. It now is a trait. So they trained it. They trained to get there, not intentionally. It wasn't like they didn't start the training going, okay, I want 25 times the amount of gamma, but they're practicing metta, and it's changing the structure of the brain.
What was the practice that they did?
So the traditional metta style is that you feel intentionally love or compassion in your heart space, like physically. It's also an emotional experience of love, and you amplify that, and you amplify it, and you amplify it, and eventually you send it to the world, or you send it to a person. You direct it. You kind of fill yourself up with the emotion, and then you direct it. But it's at a certain point you transcend the emotional body, and you activate the spiritual heart.
But that's not a physiological.
Well, you can see physiological things changing when the amplitude is
something you're
great.
calling the spiritual heart, or is this like a term?
So it's a term that my friend Lincoln Gergar uses, who you just recently interviewed.
What a great guy.
And so Lincoln helped elucidate this for me, because we are in the middle of doing a research project with Lincoln
him,
right
because
now.
He's a great channel. He actually.
Well, this guy has
I really like him.
Check out Lincoln if you know, channelhigherself.com. There you go.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, I liked him a lot.
Yeah, and so we're getting ready to present a whole bunch of data that we've been recording his brain, we've been recording his heart. We're going to do this on Friday on my show.
Great.
And so through the measurements and through the background that I have with studying these different awakening experiences, and not only does he have full control over being able to do these things, but he articulates it very clearly.
Right. He's very tuned into his sensations and his body and his But let me just ask you, before you got into all the brain stuff, what did you discover about health in the body? Because you were a great researcher in that field.
Well, so before this, I'd say maybe 4 or 5 years before this awakening type experience, I had like a massive physical meltdown, and that was
were you like a corporate guy, lawyer or something?
No, I never went the corporate route, but I was living in a mold infested home.
Oh, mold.
And my body became extremely inflamed as a result of the mold, of the mycotoxins. And I wasn't listening to that. And then I started training I was doing a lot of physical training very intensely.
You were already depleted.
And then my sleep failed, and I basically didn't sleep for 5 years. And my whole body crashed. And so I had to kind of put myself back together again. And that was right around the time when the first biohacker book first came out with Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Body. And that was when I think a lot of people went, oh, well, I don't have to rely on conventional systems to understand myself. My body anyway, I can hack it myself. I can order my own labs. I can start to understand this. And so that was me right around that time. You know, that book landed in my lap literally right after it was published.
What did you discover about getting healthy?
Well, it was a lot about, so my focus for 4 or 5 years was essentially how do I get the best sleep possible? Because that is the tool for
Sleeping.
recovery.
Actually,
Yes.
I need to find that because I haven't had a good night's sleep in a while. What is the best?
Well, so there's a lot of components that go along into that, but what I teach people is the first thing to control is your light.
Your light.
The light input to your body. And
What
so
do you
this
mean?
is probably going to resonate with
Yeah,
you because
tell
I
me
know
what you mean by that.
Yeah. So your sleep cycle and your waking cycles regulated by cortisol and melatonin.
Okay.
And they're cycling inverse to one another. Okay.
Right.
So cortisol is what wakes you up in the morning. And everyone has this like demonized version, like view of cortisol, like it's the stress hormone. And that is true sometimes.
If you have maybe too much or whatever.
Yes.
Right.
But you need it. It's requirement
to wake up.
A requirement to move through your day. So it needs to be in the right amount. It can't be too high and it can't be too low.
Okay.
And everybody knows what it feels like to have low cortisol. That is like brain fog and fatigue.
Right.
Okay. Right. Sluggish. Right. That's low cortisol. But if it's peaking at night, you're not going to be able to sleep. And it's regulated by light. Okay.
Light, sunlight, artificial light.
Specifically blue.
Blue light.
So the wavelength of blue.
How do we get blue? Is that good to be?
Well, so it's good in the right amounts at the right time. And so this is what I mean by managing your light input.
I see.
Is that how, let's imagine the world without electricity. Okay.
That's good. Yes.
So if that was the case, everyone more or less would be waking up with the sunrise. And at that time, there's a predominance of blue light frequencies coming through the atmosphere.
At sunrise.
Yes. And so that is why we're evolutionarily evolved to trigger cortisol in the presence of blue light.
And at sunset too, or just sunrise?
So mostly it's sunrise in the first few hours of daylight.
Like when it's still low in the horizon.
Yes. And then it starts to go down. And when it goes down, so we're back in pre-industrial times. Mm-hmm. The only light after sundown is coming from a fire, and fire has only basically red and orange and yellow.
Okay.
All right. So blue light is non-existent. And in the absence of blue light, about an hour and a half later, melatonin will emerge.
Oh, and makes you want to sleep.
And that's what makes you drowsy.
But if you're looking at your computer.
Now you're catching on. Exactly.
Right. Is the computer blue light or yellow?
Yeah, well, so pretty much all devices and these new LED lights that have come out, that have been like regulated to come out in the last 5-8 years.
Horrible.
Are predominantly blue. And the reason for that is because when you eliminate all of the yellow, the red, the oranges, it's just cheaper light. It's easier to create, but it's an artificial food.
Right.
So like if you're concerned about what you eat, then you should be more concerned about what you're eating through your eyes. So because the quality of light, you want to be as natural as possible.
So what do you think about those people wearing the yellow glasses?
Well, that's exactly why they wear them.
I know, but is that beneficial?
Yes, it's very beneficial. Okay. But there's other things you can do instead of wear that. Okay, so like you can put flux on your computer.
Oh yeah, like I do have an Iris Tech filter.
So like you can still be using your devices, but the app's going to filter out the blue color. Mm-hmm, the green to some extent as well will trigger cortisol. But this is what is kind of preventing people from the onset of melatonin. So if you run hormonal tests, you'll see that most people have dysregulated cortisol and melatonin.
Where does serotonin fit in?
Serotonin is a waking hormone. Mm-hmm. So it's also cycling, just like all the other hormones are cycling. It's cycled up. Mm-hmm. It's up-regulated in daylight and down-regulated in darkness. So you can't really sleep when you have a lot of serotonin in your system.
I see.
Which is why it's happening during the day. So and most people think this is the happy hormone, serotonin, which is true, but it's also is very important for your gut. It's very important for the function of your gut. So it will improve motility in your gut. Like if you don't have serotonin, you're not going to be moving your bowels.
Some people say, though, it's really depleted in ayahuasca ceremonies. Have you looked at that effect of serotonin?
Not specifically with ayahuasca, but I mean that with MDMA, that's very commonly the case.
It will deplete serotonin.
Yes, it will. Yeah, it'll deplete. And so you'll hear that a lot of times people have like depressive type symptoms after that, and there's a recovery period before they kind of normalize. And people that do this a lot, there's like a down regulation of serotonin production. And so it can be not in all, not in every case, but it can.
So before the awakening, you studied light, the effects of light, but also how do you like prolong longevity of the body? I know that was a field you looked at.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump threads a little bit here.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
And so I asked myself, okay, well, what are the metrics of longevity if we were to physiologically measure them?
Right.
And some of probably the most obvious one is called telomeres.
Right. I've heard about that. Yes. People are talking about telomeres, telomerase.
Telomerase. And so that was a Nobel Prize, I think, in 2012, somewhere around there.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of telomeres, the extension of the things,
the chromosomal caps.
Right.
And so when that enzyme is working, the caps are protected by
and
telomeres.
They last longer. So
yes. Okay. So that's one thing. And so you can measure that, and that will show you basically where your biological age is relative to your chronological age and how quickly you're aging.
And then how do you extend your telomeres?
Well, so that's one metric.
Okay, that's one. Okay, let's go.
Yeah. So another metric, which I started, so I did a little bit with telomeres, but I realized that you have to be careful with the lab that measures it, because not all the labs are accurate. Okay. And so I kind of shied away from that because I couldn't validate what lab was good and what was not, but I had a better way to do it. Okay. And that was measuring heart rate variability.
Like the slower the heart rate, the better. Is that what they're saying?
It's a slightly like that. Okay. So the heart beats irregularly by design. So if, let's say, we have a scenario where your heart rate right now is 60 beats per minute, it's not beating 1 beat per second every beat. It's beating 0.098, 1.0 through. It's
variable.
It's variable.
And that's a good thing.
Yes. And that seems counterintuitive.
No, it makes sense because you want variability.
You want variability. And so that is directly correlated with longevity as well.
The more so it's good to like race, to work out and then stop and do all that.
That's one thing you can do. Yeah. So we'll call it exercise or movement in the right dose. Okay, because somebody like me will overdose on that kind of thing, and you'll decrease your heart rate variability.
Oh,
and so you end up in the same place as somebody who does zero movement.
How long should someone exercise for then?
It's personal. And so the way that you can test that is by just getting something simple like the Aura ring, which is a biometric ring that you wear. I think they're selling it for about $200, something like that. And it measures your HRV throughout the day. And you can see how athletes do this all the time. It is like one of the best metrics of athletic performance and recovery. So you see, you basically do your workout and then you have a good night's sleep. And the next morning, you can determine how well you recovered you are from that workout based on your HRV. Nice. So your workout is essentially dependent on how well you recover, which is a function of sleep, which is why I was so focused on sleep.
And light and all that.
Yes.
So heart rate, sleep, light. What else did you discover? Telomeres.
Yeah. So, you hear a lot of the gut these days.
Scott Howell, Zach Bush, all that.
Love Zach Bush. Zach Bush is amazing.
I interviewed him actually.
Oh, did you?
Really a great guy. Just a great guy.
I love his
palate too. He talks all about, these bottles that children would suck instead of breast milk, creates a narrow palate, which kind of narrows the teeth, which stops this expansion of the palate, creates more digestion, more saliva gland productivity. So there's a whole thing, and then the whole gut thing and all that.
Yeah, so there's that, and the palate also related to how you breathe. That's
Right.
another big piece, is that
Palate,
it creates a lot of mouth breathing
yes.
instead of nasal breathing.
We're all mouth breathers because we've been fed by bottles. I mean, maybe you weren't. I don't know.
I was to, I don't know, 6 months or something like that.
Yeah.
But so the breathing is highly impacting the sleep as well. And so you can
Yes.
condition that. So that's what's so great about the body, is if you have a consistent intervention that you want to perform, you can change your body. You can change the physiology. And so, every once in a while, there's like a massive event that happens and the whole physiology changes. And we hear about that kind of thing.
What do you mean? Like what kind of like a trauma?
A trauma is an example of that, like a major trauma, not a micro trauma.
Right.
Or maybe there's an experience of awakening. That's another thing.
Did that change your physiology?
It did. It changed my HRV a lot.
HRV is what?
Heart rate variability.
It did.
Yeah.
It did. It normalized, or like
it improved it.
It improved your variability.
Yeah. So and then if you can look at the heart. Try not to get too technical. I like getting technical, but basically what I'm talking about with the beat to beat variability, that's a time domain measurement. So we're looking at basically time, but you can also look at the heart rate variability as a frequency spectrum. Okay.
Right.
And this is where it more specifically relates to awakening, because there are frequencies in the heart that will be much higher for people that have awakened experiences.
Oh, really? Different levels of frequency.
Yes.
Well, that's interesting.
Yes.
Now, what about the cold water plunges and stuff like that? What do you know?
So, right. So you're asking, like, how do you improve HRV? So
cold,
yes, cold is amazing.
Cold water.
Yes. Probably the fastest way to change your heart rate and HRV is to put your face in cold water at about 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
Isn't that also create something? What's that nerve that
the vagus nerve?
Vagus nerve.
Well, the vagus nerve is what essentially determines the high level of HRV. So when you have more vagus nerve activation, you have more variability in your heart. So
immersing your face in cold water, 50 or lower, right? Maybe even 40.
Well, it doesn't, no, because if there's a phenomenon, you really only need to be between 50 and 55 degrees.
Like for how long?
Well, however long you can hold your face under there without taking a breath.
The longer the better.
Yeah, the longer the better. But like, say an example, if you put your face under there for 30 seconds, it will probably drop your heart rate down to almost your lowest resting heart rate. And if you were to do this maybe 2 or 3 times in a row, and let's say you don't have any practice with this.
2 or 3 times a day, yeah.
Well, let's say you put your face in cold water, then you come out for a minute or two, then you put it back in for 30 seconds, you come out for a minute or two, and you put it back for 30 seconds. You'll be pretty much at your lowest resting heart rate.
And that's great. That's where you want to be.
Yeah, well, that's vagal tone activation. And the more you use that vagus nerve, the more active and predominant it becomes in your physiology. And that vagus nerve is very connected to states of awakening.
Oh, in what way?
The more vagal activation you have, the more ability your brain has to go into alpha and gamma.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Well, that's why I'm saying you can use the body as a tool for awakening. We have this amazing structure here. A lot of folks like to think that it's a top-down thing only, but like you were saying, this is an emergent property. So we can hack the body in a way to direct it towards more awakening type experiences.
Are you writing a book about this? They're using the body for awakening. You should. I mean, I haven't seen a book. Is there one out there?
I don't know one out there. Most of it's aimed at pathologies. Most of it's how do you extend your life? You
could be the new health guru if you write this book. I mean, I think so. I think there's a market for it because there's a lot of stuff about diet, but there's no stuff about hacking the body for awakening and for longevity.
I would like to write that book.
Well, what's stopping you?
Yeah, you have to give me some tips, Alan.
No, just sit down and everything you told me here, just write it out in detail, and then, or even transcribe this, and then you have an outline. But so there's that cold water for vagal nerve, and is there anything else like that?
Yeah, there's a bunch of things actually.
Like,
So the vagus nerve, so the vagus means wandering in Latin, and it goes all through your gut. It goes through
oh,
almost every major organ. It does not go through your spinal column. It actually comes out the base of your skull, and it
oh,
innervates almost everything in your body.
uh-huh.
So anything that you do to any one of these organs will have a systemic effect, meaning that you can put your face in cold water, but if you hum or sing, that will trigger the vagus nerve.
Really, singing. Oh, I didn't know
If
that
you take
either.
extended exhales, that will trigger the vagus nerve.
Oh, okay.
Did you just feel lighter
I
when you
felt
did
a
that?
release.
And that is
Yeah.
exactly why when we sigh, we're
Mhm.
doing this unconsciously to increase our alpha.
Oh,
It's a relaxation
so
response.
you really have the whole science under,
I wanted to understand it. I
and you
like
have understood it.
yeah, I mean but there's so much more,
Right.
there's so much
Well, the
more that we
discovery.
don't know.
Right.
And so that's where I'm at. I
But
wanted
how do you extend the telomeres?
okay. So what the scientists think is that the process is interrupted by oxidative stress.
What's
So
that mean?
So oxidation is essentially the aspect of oxygen oxidizing cells, oxidizing the
And,
telomerase
and
enzyme.
this is what stress does. It creates oxygen.
Stress, and so stress is a big word that can mean many different things,
Mhm.
and it can mean something like, and it's also a word that we, just like within the UFO community, we need to, we're defining new terms as we learn more.
Stress can be
is
good.
exactly,
Your
and so
bones need the stress of gravity to stay
exactly
strong. So
that's
I get.
exactly. So we call that a hormetic stress. A
Ah,
hormetic stress is dosage dependent.
mhm.
So you can do something physically to your body or even psychologically stress yourself, but if you do it too much, it becomes a negative stress.
Right.
And if you do it in the right amount, you recover from it and become more adaptable, more resilient,
And
more
stronger.
robust.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Robust. Yeah.
And so you start now have to look at what causes undue oxidative stress in the body. And so things that a person can do are intermittent fasting.
Mhm.
This is a big thing
That
because
creates less intermittent
right,
fasting.
because the process of eating creates oxidative stress. Now there's a necessity to that, but people don't need to eat as much as they do eat.
I
And
know.
what's also important is the timing of when you eat. And that's what intermittent fasting
When
is.
should you actually eat?
So there's all these cycles that are happening in the body, which is fascinating. Your hormones are cycling, your brain waves are cycling, your gut motility is cycling. And when you eat, so essentially your eating window should only be during daylight hours.
You should not eat after the sun goes down.
Right.
Oh,
and therefore your cycling of when you eat is going to be seasonally dependent, so that you're eating in a more confined window in the wintertime and in a larger window in the summertime. And what you eat will be dependent upon the season as well.
Yes, of course.
Right. So if you're outside of the tropics, let's say north of 20 degrees, then you're essentially eating more fat in the wintertime within a smaller window of time.
Right.
And therefore you're intermittent fasting for a longer period of time.
Okay. Which is what you should do in the winter.
And that improves oxidative stress, that reduces it.
Well, that's a macro technique. You don't eat a banana if you're living at the North Pole. I mean, it's like,
yes,
because your body doesn't know what to do with it, because your body's much more ecologically related to the environment.
Exactly. And so this gets back to light, because that banana wouldn't grow up there because the light from the sun. That's why it doesn't reach. So if we start to think of our food inputs as dependent upon how the sun cycles with the earth, then we're just being more natural. You know what I'm saying? And so this naturalness is what can lead us or prime us for awakening experiences. I'll put it that way. So let's break down stress for an example, because I think it's important. So Stress from a psychological standpoint will interrupt and dysregulate cortisol patterns. And cortisol is a really important hormone, as we talked about before. You need it, but not in the wrong times and in the wrong amounts. You need it just right. They call it a Goldilocks hormone, like our planet, like the materialists that don't want to think that anything else exists out there other than humans. It's like we're a Goldilocks species, right? So psychological stress is one of the biggest problems with human physiology in the human body right now.
Right. Like sitting in traffic will cause stress because you're late to the appointment. And that's like a panic reaction, right?
Yes. And so what you're getting at, which I think is really important, is it's not the thought, it's the emotion.
Yes, the emotions. Yes, absolutely.
It's the emotions that create the havoc or the benefit in the body. It's not really the thoughts.
Right. Well, thoughts and emotions are very connected.
But they're connected to a point. But if you've ever gone on an extended meditation retreat, you'll see that your emotional body has a pattern that is not dependent upon your thoughts, because you're not having thoughts if you're meditating for long periods of time.
Yeah.
So these different emotions will start to cycle inside of you, and you see them occurring.
You notice them, yes.
Because you're not thinking anything. You're just watching them emerge. You might get really angry, like if you've got this pattern. Or you might feel extreme lust, or you might feel extreme depression, but it cycles in and out. And so if you can create a witness experience, you can see the cycling that's not dependent on the thought in real time. These are patterns of thoughts that create the emotions, right? Yes. And so that's what ultimately regulates all of your neuropeptides and all of your hormones.
Right. So we have to just see the stress coming up and try to, avoid it or rationalize it or
that's, I think, the key of a good practitioner is determining what is the appropriate intervention for each person, because it'll be a little different for each person.
It's great what you've put together, a whole structure of awakening with the body, with the mind, with certain practices, so people can actually have an awakened experience hacking the body. That is a really great approach to health, spirituality, consciousness. I'm really happy we've had this conversation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And how can people find you?
So I've got two websites. The first one that's new, and I interviewed Alan recently, so you can check out that interview, awarenessascending.com. And so this is a free platform for I have a show on there, but there will be other shows that are coming up, and it's all oriented towards awakening and understanding this better. People who've had experiences talking about that and what they've learned, as well as the science of awakening. So that's what that platform is about. And then I also teach meditation and yoga. And so that website is quantum.yoga.
Right.
That's it. And I always like to say it's so simple, it's confusing. There's no .com afterwards. It's quantum.yoga.
Oh, no .com.
It's so simple, it's confusing.
Okay. That sounds like a lot of things, right?
Yeah. Yes.
No, that is great. No, I appreciate your research, because you've gone into the whole science of it, and you definitely should. I mean, I'll talk to my publisher or something if you're interested. No, I think it would be really a good platform, because all these other people are writing books and it becomes a fad, but they don't give you the whole body. They don't give you the connection to spirit or awakening. They just tell you do this, this, and this, but it's not integrated into all the realms of that we exist on.
Yeah.
So I think
that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, that's what I think. Thank you for watching. I'm Alan Steinfeld for New Realities with John and Raickert. And if you have any questions, you can email me or look up Jonathan's website. Thank you for watching today.